Hello, listener. You're welcome to yet another episode. This is my Beautifier Community Youth Uganda and Recovery Chapel, brought to you by the presenter today, Jamesboy Imani. And today our topic is going to be tackling sex addiction. So the topic is tackling sex addiction. Another word you can replace for addiction is abuse. Now, we begin this by defining what is sex. Sex has different definitions. It differs, the scientific definition differs from the Bible definition, and also there's what we call the general definition, how people may perceive sex as, and that could differ in many ways. It could differ due to culture, it could differ due to education levels, it could even differ due to age. The understanding of the definition of sex is different also depending at what particular age an individual is at. But basically, the normal definition would be that sex is when a man and a woman come together and in unity through sexual intercourse. This is where body organs, the male and female reproductive organs come in contact, and of course, one of the results is reproduction, but also sex is something that is also pleasurable. So when we go to the Bible definition, sex is supposed to be enjoyed in the confines of marriage strictly, and it is supposed to be an act between a male and a female strictly. So the basic general definition and purpose of sex in the Bible is for reproduction, as we see in Genesis chapter 1 verse 28, where God instructs man and woman, you know what, fill the earth, reproduce, fill the earth, and have dominion. So sex is for pleasure, but also for the purpose of fulfilling God's bigger agenda, and that's also part of multiplication. So reproduction is part of God's agenda. Now, if we are speaking about sex addiction, basically we are meaning the abuse. Sex is a gift given by God to man, but when it is a level now where it is an addiction, then that is definitely an abuse. And we have so many types of addictions, and sex is one new kind of addiction, though it has not been globally been added on the list of officially recognized addictions. But in the days to come, I believe all evidence proves that sex is now an addiction, and soon or later it will be added on the list of serious addictions because of its adverse effects. Sex addiction, or you could say sex abuse, can also be known as hypersexuality. It can be known as compulsive disorder or an obsession, and of course all this leads to repetitive behavior. So sex addiction is when an individual concerned has obsessive thoughts and repetitive thoughts of sex in their mind. That could be in the thoughts, but also has repetitive behavior, physical lifestyle of repetitive behavior of indulgence, sexual indulgence, or generally all around this individual's lifestyle is focused basically around sex and sex-related material. So everything, you'd say, to the greatest extent, this person spends most of their time indulging and fantasizing and doing things that are related to sex. So that means now it has gone from the level of being just a gift or something that's supposed to be used with a purpose to now being totally abused and actually becoming, the individuals now becoming slaves to what they were supposed to originally be masters to. Now, in Proverbs chapter 25 verse 28 it says, "A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls." So we see that this kind of addiction, the sex addiction, or any other type of addiction, it is something that controls a man. This means this becomes the master, and the person involved, the man or woman, becomes the slave to it, because now they no longer do things appropriately but are controlled by these negative desires. Now, one thing we should know, that anything that is not godly is definitely fueled by the devil. Now, the devil is one person. The devil is behind all these destructive behaviors or addictions, because his main agenda is to destroy mankind and man's image, because we all know that man was created in the image of God, and this is one thing that the devil is displeased with. So the devil has this passionate hate towards mankind and would do anything to mar or damage that image of godliness in man. So through addiction is one such kind where he keeps people as in bondage, because addiction actually keeps the individual in bondage all around, spiritual, psychological, physical, and these people really no longer have any power or control to determine their destiny or next course of life. Now, how the devil does this, of course, he brings the triggers, he uses media and all those things, but the end result is to get you hooked, and once you're hooked, it's usually a very hard thing to get out. Now, sex addiction takes many different forms and can be expressed in different forms, definitely. Now, we have this word called paraphilia, which means the uncontrollable urge to do something, when you want to do something and you have no control about it, and yet it's negative. There is irresistibility. You cannot resist to do this thing. So sex addiction brings this paraphilia. One thing, for something to qualify as an addiction, it means that this is an activity that an individual is indulged in and faces very many negative consequences or effects, but regardless of these negative effects, the individual still cannot stop. In fact, they just continue to go in deeper and deeper. So most of the times, even these addicts are no longer proud or happy to indulge in such activities, but it's because now they no longer have the power over this habit. So basically, this means that addiction is a very deadly or terrible thing, or disease, because it produces negative effects and the individual still continues to indulge nevertheless. So that's what we would call addiction. So sex addiction means the person is involved in sex and sexual related activities that are damaging the person and are causing many negative effects, but this individual still cannot find the power to pull themselves out. Now, some of the forms of sex addiction, of course, all these have the paraphilia, the uncontrollable urge, where one wants to do something and there's no power to fight it, the irresistibility. So there is pornography. Pornography can take many forms. They can be magazines, they could be internet websites, pornographic sites, they could be pornographic movies. There are so many avenues. There is prostitution. This could be buying of sex or even selling, because even some of the prostitutes take part in the prostitution because they are addicted to sex. Then there is also masturbation, which also involves a lot of fantasy. Now, masturbation in its extremes can actually cause even the sexual dysfunctionality. It can cause human damage depending on the kind of fantasy, because some of the fantasies in masturbation are actually very dangerous and harmful, and could actually harm the individual doing it. There is also the sadistic behavior. This is where the person involved in sex gets pleasure by punishing or mistreating the person they are having sex with, or in the sexual intimacy. So this could involve bondage, could involve slapping, punching, throwing, urinating on the person, all these funny weird habits. So sadistic is where you get happiness through doing rather inhuman activities on an individual that you are involved with during sex. Another one is the masochistic behavior, where the person involved enjoys the being treated harshly. Actually, this is the person who the sadist works upon. So this is a person who enjoys suffering during this sexual intercourse by being beaten, being tied up, being suffocated, being kicked, punched, slapped, and they gain pleasure out of such sexual encounter. So you can imagine how crazy it seems. There's also exhibition or exhibitionism. This is where people move around. The sex addict moves around displaying their private organs to unsuspecting people without consent. Mostly this it's the males who always majority of the people who fall under this category are usually males, and females it's a rare case, but this happens also. It can be like to children and unsuspecting people. It could even be in public, so it can even cause much shame. So imagine you just flash your body organ, private body organ in before somebody. It can even traumatize this person, especially if it's a child, and even follow them in life, and later they develop very dangerous lifelong effects because of such. There is also voyeurism. Voyeurism, this is where people stalk or move around looking for people who are naked or who are having sex. So this turns these people on, looking at someone maybe bathing, looking at someone who's naked, following and spying. So basically this one works where you're spying and on an unsuspecting individual. So this is when someone is focused on enjoying that image of a naked person or people having sex to get excitement, but the person who is naked or having sex is not aware that they are being watched. So this is called voyeurism. It's another form of sex addiction, one of the forms. There's also the fetishism. This is where objects are used to gain pleasure. For example, things like uniform, shoes. So someone to be turned on, they need their sexual partner to look in a particular way, maybe like a nurse or a doctor, uniforms. It's just a crazy build up in the mind. Then also there's the pedophilia. These are actually like pedophiles. There's a risk of people abusing children. Pedophiles are people who abuse children sexually. So sex addiction could lead to the level of pedophilia. And also other wrongful use of sex can have addiction. You know, sex, according to the context that God created, has also been totally deviated, and there are other forms of supposedly sexual contacts, but which are actually not biblical. There are things like bestiality and homosexuality, but even these unbiblical habits or forms of satanic inventions of sex can also still be addictive in a way, and people end up suffering, plus many other forms of sex addictions. Now, what are the causes of sex addiction? Causes of sex addiction can fall in three categories. There is the biological, there is the psychological, and there is the social. So there's the biological, psychological, and social. All these influence the sex addiction. Now, the biological causes, for example, the most common is the genetic. Some people are born with genetics of high sex drive, and this leads to sex addiction. This can also involve those people with high hormones, or you can say testosterone in the men, and these hormones also lead to the hypersexuality. Under the psychological causes, of course, there could be those individuals who are raised in dysfunctional families, and what they saw or what they went through affected their later habits. There is also the early life exposure, especially the abuse. Some people are abused in childhood stage, and this later affects them psychologically to particular behaviors later in life. There's even pornography exposure in early stages of life. One could be exposed to pornography, which later affects them. There's also the mental health, that things like anxiety, depression, and personality disorders. So mental health highly determines also whether this person who is a sex addict is the way they are. Then there is also search for love and intimacy. Actually, most people might think that through this sex addiction people derive happiness, but it's actually a way to hide from the reality of lack of love and intimacy. So when someone lacks the intimate love, they resort to artificial ways of trying to make it up, and usually these are the crazy ways that they come up with. So those are some of the few points under the psychological causes. Then we also have the social causes. One of these is like rejection. When you get rejected, maybe by your family, get rejected by your peers, get rejected by people around you, and follow people's comments. Maybe some people say you're not good enough, someone says you don't look good, and all that. It could lead you to finding an avenue of feeling acceptable, and that is definitely sex addiction. It can lead to sex addiction. There's the isolation. First of all, rejection could bring isolation, and isolation could also be brought about by so many other issues, including the low self-esteem and other personality disorders, which leads this person to seek happiness or solace in sex, and that makes it like a sex addiction, because now that's where they derive their happiness and sense of meaning and all that, and identity. Then there is also peer influence, or you can call it the social influence, where people get into habits because of the kind of people they hang around or the societies they're exposed to. So those are some of the social causes. Now, we have the symptoms and signs of sex addiction. Excessive sexual thoughts, those are obsessiveness. The thoughts can't get out of your mind. The thoughts are always in the mind, and everything the person does, think about, is associated to sex. Then there is also the shame and guilt. Most people who are addicts do not even enjoy what they do. So it's because now they've become slaves to the master, who's the addiction. And after they take part in this activity, or maybe after they indulge, it always ends up in shame and guilt, because this person in the first place did not want to do such a thing, but ended up doing it because they had no control. Of course, the shame and guilt can also lead to depression. Depression is so serious, and of course, depression causes many things. Depression could disorganize relationship, it could disorganize work. Depression could even bring about suicidal tendencies and suicidal thoughts. And in fact, depression itself can also lead to other types of addictions, things like alcohol and drug abuse. All could arise because of this depression. Then the other thing is the neglecting of important activities or responsibilities. So here an individual would rather indulge in sex-related activities and forego important responsibilities in life. This could be work, it could be school, it could be family, and you can see now that becomes a terrible thing. There is also excessive masturbation, as I'd mentioned earlier in the other episode, which could actually damage a person's private organs. It could damage a person's mind. It could be harmful physically and actually also psychologically, because masturbation can even lead to dysfunctional sexual lifestyle, where a person is no longer able to even erect. A man is no longer even able to erect because they can no longer receive the high that they are used to receiving, maybe through pornography and these funny fetishes. So masturbation in excessiveness is also very harmful. It can lead to injury of the private organs and even cause total impotence in the end. There's also the risky behavior, because as we see, an addict is never in control of their actions, because their faculties at that time cannot really think proper or right, so they could just do anything as long as they achieve that satisfaction in the mind. So risky behavior could involve things like unprotected sex. They could involve things like rape. They could involve things like defilement, and even job loss, because one may decide to surf porn at work, with a computer system, with a work computer. So this could risk the person losing their job, and the reputation. And we've seen many great men also lose their reputation and important posts, and including money and family, because of the risks they take in order to satisfy these desires. Of course, addiction, for someone to feel that satisfaction, there is what we call a dopamine effect. It's a chemical released when someone has achieved a particular thing. Now, each time a person does this, they would wish to experience that effect, which is called the dopamine effect. And sometimes when you get used to this effect, the next time you need double the dose or double the action in order to achieve the same high feel that you felt last time. That's what leads someone into the addiction, because each time you come, you have to increase the level of what you did last time in order to achieve the same effect of satisfaction. So those are the things that can lead to things like risky behaviors. Of course, risky behavior, as we've discussed, it leads to things like ruined relationships, lack of faithfulness in relationships like marriage. It's hard to trust such a person, especially if someone has started messing up. We've seen marriages break because of sex addictions, and of course, even children lose trust in their parents and all that. And the community also begins to despise and fear the person, the individual. Of course, all these risky sexual behaviors can lead to criminal offenses, which can actually lead to imprisonment. That is serious. That is how serious this is. Things like, let's say, pedophilia, abuse of children, rape, and all those things could lead to serious criminal offenses. And of course, part of a risky sexual behavior, we have things like multiple sexual partners in order to feel the satisfaction. Though this does not mean that everyone who has multiple sexual partners is a sex addict, but most sex addicts actually have multiple sexual partners. So we also have a wastage of money, because these ventures, especially sexual related ventures, involve a lot of sacrifice. It could even be money, or even valuable time and assets. So there is a lot of wastage, and all these things are done, are given away in exchange for what we call a temporary sexual satisfaction, a good sexual feeling. And this is done at all costs. It could even involve stealing, it could even involve borrowing, it could even involve spending all that you have. So it is that dangerous. That's how risky addiction is. Of course, risky behavior is connected to recklessness. People no longer really care about their actions, they just do anything. And reckless behavior could lead to so many major problems. There's a lot of time invested for sexual activities, because now time is one of the greatest, if not the greatest capital, the greatest asset that any individual has. But for a person who's an addict, especially a sexual addict, they do not really value time in form of constructive conduct or constructive activities, but instead use time for destructive actions, and all these have to be related to the sex activities. That's where all their priorities, their time, their efforts are spent around or related to the sexual urges. Now, there is sexual dysfunction, and this is due to things like the depression, the shame, the guilt, the excessive masturbation, etc. And also watching too much pornography. And of course, we know too much pornography will lead to things like too much masturbation. It will also lead to things like multiple sexual partners. It will lead to things like prostitution. It will lead to things like wastage of money, and many more. So those are symptoms of a person who is a sex addict. So if you find yourself, or you know anyone who has most of those effects, because there are many, but has some of those that I've mentioned, and you believe they have at least 2 or 3 or 4, you just know this person is struggling with addiction. Or if it is you, you know you're struggling, you're actually an addict. Though the symptoms could differ depending on the individual. Not every individual shows the same exact signs. They could differ, but at least 2 or 3 or 4 of these symptoms apply to all sex addicts. Now, the solutions for sex addictions, the first would be for someone to know that recovery is a process, and takes time. Recovery takes time. So don't put yourself under pressure to say, I have to stop, or maybe you keep relapsing and all that, and you feel like you want to crucify yourself. The first step would be to accept that you have a problem, quit the denial, and accept you have a problem. Of course, once you accept you have a problem and you feel it's too much beyond you, you have to seek professional or medical intervention. This could be from the therapists, and you get things like medication. They would really prescribe the right medicine depending on the assessment they do on you. But sometimes they give medicine like antidepressant, because addiction is highly connected to depression, and even hormonal balancing medicine, which will help to calm down or to reduce the production of the testosterone, which can lead to sex addiction. Of course, there's also Christian counseling or any other type of professional counseling. You can also seek support from loved ones. This could be our spouses, it could be our family, brothers, sisters, siblings, parents, and all that. As long as you're willing to come out and be open, then these people are willing to come in and support. People will be sympathetic and will be willing to help you out of this problem. The other thing is to quit the guilt, feelings, and the shame. Forgive yourself for what went wrong, for all the damages that you caused, and don't live in the past, because that mental trauma will, if not overcome, will not allow you to actually heal and will take you back to where you are fighting to come from. So to beat sexual addiction, you must forgive yourself and let go of the guilt and the shame. Also find purpose in life, because most of the times addiction is caused by people who fail to find real purpose in life. They fail to find the reason for their existence. They fail to find that thing that gives them a sense of importance and happiness. But once you find your purpose, you really get a reason to live. And of course, purpose is divine. So to find your purpose, you must really seek God. And through purpose, you really find a way to channel your interests away from this sex addiction. So you need to pray and read the Word of God, spend time in God's presence, cultivate a relationship with Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit will help you fight these problems that you're facing. So it is very important to spend time and read the Word of God. Prayer and fasting are powerful. So prayer and fasting are very great tools that you can use, especially for this strong addiction. Fasting is also highly encouraged. Even Jesus said it to the disciples in Matthew chapter 17, verse 21, when they had failed to cast out a particular strong demon. And he told them that some types of demons only go out through prayer and fasting. One thing you should know is that sex addiction and all kinds of addictions are all demonic. So to cast them out, you need the prayer and the fasting, and God will open you, will free you from that bondage. The other thing, you need to change from the negative peer influence, that wrong company, that social circle that you're in that is leading you to that sexual addiction. You need to really review it. And then you also need to eliminate all triggers. There are so many triggers that can lead someone to sex addiction, things like TV, those programs which are really insinuating, or they plant that seed of sex in you. Provocative programs, things like magazines, things like some areas, very small things. You just need to look around you and pick that thing that you think triggers you, because also triggers differ per individual, and then get rid of them. You need to stop the denial, accept yourself and accept you have a problem, and face these things and eliminate the triggers. Now as we close, I will read a Bible verse from Titus chapter 2, verse 11 to 12. It says, "For the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people. It teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passion, and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age." So here we see that we have the ability to live godly lives, and this is of course by the grace of God. Through the divine enablement of God, we are able to live godly lives and say no to ungodliness and worldly passion, because sex addiction and any type of addiction and lusts are worldly passions sponsored by the devil, are not godly. And so we can live a godly life of self-control and in this exact season of life we are in, it is really possible to live a godly life and overcome these bad vices that have enslaved us in these lives of hopelessness and unhappiness. So the greatest solution to beating sex addiction or any other type of addiction is found in God. So seek God today. Make God the center of everything in your life. Repent, change your mind, change the way you do things, change your circles, give your life to God, give your heart to God. Come to God today wholeheartedly. Tell him your problem, ask him to come and change your life. Ask him to be your friend. Ask him, give him permanent residence in your heart. And as you do that, God will transform you in your deep down there. God will start changing your heart. God will change your mind. God will give you convictions. He will even give you the power, So this sex addiction is possible to overcome 100%, but only by the power of God. And we all have the power to choose to live our lives in ways that glorify God. So come to God today, and God will set your life free today. May God bless you. Till next time, bye-bye.